Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. I was going to start this video by saying that this is one of the sickest crimes that I've ever heard about, but then I've probably said that about 20 different true crime cases already, mostly because I tend to pick the cases that really get under my skin. But anyway, this one is truly a disturbing case, and it was suggested to me by Faceless for Mick on Instagram, so thank you Faceless. This probably would have flown right under my radar otherwise. This is the case of the Baraboo Bone Breaker. Our tale begins on the 3rd of July 1994 in the city of Baraboo, Wisconsin. 14-year-old Chris Steiner had gone to bed early that night. He had a job at a nearby McDonald's and he needed to be up early. At 6:15 the following morning, Chris's parents went into his room to wake him up and they found his bed empty. Downstairs they found a screen window had been cut open and there were muddy footprints in the house and the front door was unlocked. They assumed that Chris's friends had snuck into the house via the screen window, woke Chris up and he had sneaked out with them on some kind of teenage escapade. When Chris failed to come home later that day, his parents got a bit more suspicious and they reported him missing. He didn't seem like the kind of kid that would have run away from home, but there was no signs of struggle that might indicate that he'd been removed from the house against his will. Then, on the 10th of July, 7 days after Chris had gone missing, 2 people jet skiing on the Wisconsin River discovered the bloated corpse of a boy caught at the side of the river on a tree stump. The body was badly decomposed, but they were able to use dental records to confirm that it was the body of Chris Steiner. An autopsy concluded that Chris had drowned, but other than that, the body yielded few clues. Coroners couldn't determine whether his death was accidental, if he had taken his own life, or if foul play was involved. They knew that the water had killed him, but the circumstances surrounding his death remained undetermined. Fast forward 1 year to the 29th of July 1995. 13-year-old Thad Phillips and his parents had recently moved into their new home in Baraboo. Thad had fallen asleep on the couch and at some point in the early hours of the morning he felt himself being lifted off the couch and carried. In his half-asleep state he thought it was one of his parents putting him to bed, but as he opened his eyes he saw that he was being carried by an older teenage boy, someone he didn't recognise. This boy was 17-year-old Joe Clark. Clark carried Thad out of the house and into the street. Now, this part's a bit strange. Clark tells Thad to run with him to his house, and for some reason Thad agrees. I'm not sure why, considering Joe Clark had just broken into his house and abducted him, but for some reason he just goes along with it, runs with Clark for about a mile until they get to a dilapidated house. Inside the house, it's completely filthy. Everywhere's covered in trash and things are piled up all over the place. Thad Phillips starts to get a bit weirded out at this point, but Clark convinces him that there's going to be a party and he names a number of Thad's real life friends. He tells him that his friends are going to come over soon for the party. Thad seems to buy this and he remains in the house. Joe Clark then convinces Thad to come upstairs with him to a bedroom. Once they're inside the bedroom, Joe Clark throws him onto the bed and overpowers him. He grabs hold of Thad's leg and starts twisting the foot to the side painfully. Despite Thad's screams of pain, he just keeps twisting the foot until there's a sudden crack and the ankle shatters. Thad must have got a surge of adrenaline at this point. He manages to jump up off the bed and with his shattered ankle he hops down the stairs in an attempt to escape. Clark catches up with him easily, throws him down on a couch and severely beats him. Joe Clark grabs hold of Thad's broken leg and bends it upwards towards his head, and then he leans his full body weight down on the leg until the hip bone snaps. Thad is then dragged up into the bedroom, and there he is subjected to a long night of horrific torture, the abuse mainly directed at his leg bones. I don't know if you've ever broken your leg, but it's supposed to be one of the most excruciating things a human can experience. While I was researching this video, I found a few people on forums saying that they'd broken their legs in the past, and reading about this story made them feel physically sick because of how agonizing they knew broken bones were. And for those people, as painful as it was, they most likely broke their leg, lay very, very still until they were rescued, and then they had their leg carefully immobilized in hospital, and still it was one of the worst experiences of their lives. Now imagine Thad Phillips' ordeal as some sadist pulled, bent and twisted his broken legs for hours on end, muffling his screams with a towel. As the hours dragged on, Thad saw different sides to Joe Clark. Sometimes he would be kind and nurturing. He would tend to Thad's broken legs, pulling multiple layers of white socks over his battered legs to make a makeshift bandage. He would then carry Thad downstairs to the couch, and they would watch TV together, chatting as if they were buddies. It was during these chats that Thad learned more about Joe Clark's particular perversions. Clark said that he enjoyed the sound and the feeling of breaking bones. He told Thad that he had attempted to break his own legs, but he could never bring himself to do it. He could never get the angle quite right. There seemed to be a big sexual aspect to the bone breaking. Clark would get physically aroused when twisting and breaking Thad's mangled legs. Clark would sometimes wrap his own legs in the socks and masturbate in front of the boy. Other times he would truss Thad up in leg braces and force him to walk around on his shattered bones. Clark would switch from his caring, nurturing persona to a rage-filled sadist in an instant. The slightest provocation would set him off. He would vent his anger on Thad's body, beating him relentlessly, and forcing a pillow down onto his face and threatening to suffocate him. At some point, Clark had to go out, so he left Thad on the bed, believing that he wouldn't be able to move with two broken legs. By this point, both of his ankles had been shattered and twisted round, and his hip bone was broken. Amazingly, Thad dragged himself off the bed and threw himself down the stairs in an attempt to escape. Unfortunately, the pain of falling down the stairs caused him to pass out. Joe Clark returned to the house to find his captive unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. As punishment, Clark jumped up and down on Thad's chest, cracking his ribs. Then he twisted his shattered ankle round and round like a rubber band. By the second day of his ordeal, Thad was in a really bad way. His legs were horrifically swollen and they were turning a putrid yellow colour. Still though, the tortures continued, with Clark further twisting and deforming his swollen legs. By the end of one torture session, Thad's leg was twisted so badly that it faced backwards. Later that night, on the 30th of July, Clark needed to leave the house once more. This time he dragged Thad Phillips across the bedroom floor and locked him in a closet. Once Clark was out of the house, Thad felt around in the dark and he found a heavy guitar buried amongst the piles of junk in the closet. He used this guitar to smash down the cupboard door and he dragged himself out of the room. With two completely shattered legs, he threw himself down the stairs yet again. Then he pulled himself into the kitchen. The pain was so great that he passed out several times in the process. Whenever he woke up, he had no idea how long he'd been out or whether Joe would come back at any point. Eventually though, he managed to reach a phone and he was able to call the police. He didn't know the exact address of the house, but he gave them an approximate idea of where he was, and he gave the name of his abductor. This was enough information for the police to locate the house. After 43 hours of unimaginable pain, Thad Phillips was rescued. The sight that greeted his rescuers was horrific. A young boy with legs mangled beyond recognition. His arms were twisted, his ribs were cracked, and there was blood pooling inside his body from internal injuries. He was rushed to hospital and, amazingly, he survived. Thad Phillips was able to give his testimony to the police, and shortly afterwards, Joe Clark was arrested. In Clark's bedroom, they found hundreds of pairs of white socks and, most disturbing of all, a notebook with a list of 18 local boys' names divided into 3 columns. The columns had the headings "Get to Now," "Can Wait," and "Leg Thing." Thad Phillips's name was in the Leg Thing column. Thad told the police that Clark had admitted to already torturing 2 other boys in the same way. Thad could remember that one of the boys was called Chris, but he couldn't recall the name of the other victim. This led to the body of Chris Steiner, the boy who had drowned in the river, being exhumed and re-examined. Somehow the first autopsy had failed to spot his shattered, mangled legs, but now they saw it. Chris Steiner's legs had been twisted and broken in exactly the same manner as Thad Phillips's. It seems that once Joe Clark had grown tired of his victim, he simply threw him into the river to drown. Joe Clark claimed innocence in the killing of Chris Steiner, and he said that he had no recollection of the abduction and torture of Thad Phillips. He was found guilty of both crimes and sentenced to life imprisonment. I don't know who the other victim was. He told Thad that he'd done the leg thing to 2 other boys, but we only know of Chris Steiner. I haven't found reports of any other missing or murdered kids that might have been a victim of Clark's, so did he just make it up? I'm not sure, but there could be another victim out there. Horrific that it happened to 1 person, but to think that it might have happened to 3. Miraculously, after multiple surgeries, Thad Phillips was able to walk again. He's popped up on a couple of TV shows talking about his ordeal. It's pretty amazing that someone could go through something like that and still be able to talk about it later in life. Thanks to him, Joe Clark was prevented from ticking any more victims off his list. So I hope you found this video interesting. Thanks once again to Faceless for Mick for the suggestion. Big thanks also to the patrons for helping keep the channel going. It's much appreciated. If you're new to the channel and you've got this far, then why not check out some of my other videos? I'm sure you'll like them too. Thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.